welcome to the Unlimited 100 YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about Gust of Wind and Trevenant. Now, these two cards they've done very well in the tournaments that have been held for Unlimited 100, and there's been some discussion between players and maybe something should be done about them. Maybe they should go onto a suspect list. There should at least be a discussion in the wider community about these two cards. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk about the good points, the bad points, and perhaps why they deserve a ban. So, to start off, I'm just going to do a quick, like, I don't know, 20-second, you can't be bothered to watch the rest of the video, this is what the argument is. Okay, so for Trevenant, it's got a 100% win rate in 4 tournaments, gone completely undefeated. Not only that, but it's basically the strongest item locker, and it's very hard to play against. It's just really good, and you can get it in turn 1, so maybe something should be done about it. And for Gust of Wind, you can get up to 7 catcher effects using cards that pretty much every 100 deck plays. Versus Seeker for Lysandra, and then like Junkarm, Dowser Machine, Item Finder, Mileage Request. Now, that's a lot, and that shouldn't really be allowed, because you could basically just completely ignore whatever your opponent puts active and go for whatever else you want. So we'd like to see some changes, perhaps, or just something done about this, because I really don't think that having 7 catcher effects is really that helpful to the format, considering, yeah, that's basically it. Okay, so we'll talk about Trevenant first. Now I'm going to go over like the bad points first to try and keep this slightly objective, you know, cover both sides. Now, obviously, it's a stage 1, so you have to wait a turn to get it out, unless you have Wally. And it's weak to Dark. Now, there are a lot of cheap Dark attackers out there. Baby Yveltal for 1 energy, 30 damage. But obviously that'll stack, so you don't have to come into a lot of energy to deal with it. It's got a 3 retreat cost, which is kind of bulky, so it's hard to get out of the way. 110 HP isn't that high, considering, but it's going to be in the active spot, depending on what deck you're running it, so it can die pretty easily if you can draw into your energy. It has to be active, so again, it has to be in the active spot to do anything. Its resistance isn't that relevant, since fighting isn't played a whole lot, and it is an EX because of the hollow, so there is a drawback to using it. Now, on to perhaps why it's so good. Well, as previously mentioned, it's 100% effectiveness as a strategy. It's gone completely undefeated in 4 tournaments, which isn't unheard of, considering, thinking back to the old days of Gardelade, and obviously the eventual banning of Telepath Gardevoir. So obviously the deck is very good, and now the meta that the deck had to compete against was by no means stale. There was new decks coming in pretty much every tournament. Not all of them were new, but some of them were new, and it's completely swept through them. It beat the revival deck using all those megas. Obviously it did need items to go through it, but it still beat it, considering people were wondering how it even lost. There's a lot of decks that that Trevenant, and by extension the decks that it was placed in, just completely swept through. It's in a very well supported type. Psychic is arguably the best supported type for Unlimited 100. Like just Dust Noir, like all those cards, which is what's commonly run with it. Mystery Energy, which deals with the 3 retreat cost, if you don't want to throw a float stun on there. Now, even its attack, look, 60 and 20 to 2 bench, that's 100 damage in 1 attack for 3 energy. That's not too bad. Considering that you're locking your opponent out of a great deal of the deck, and we all know in Standard that's good. It's no worse here in Unlimited. Um, it's just very strong, and its attack is Psychic Colorless, which means you either need 2 Psychic or just need a Psychic and DCE, and that's not very. There's 2 turns to get 100 damage on the board, and that can be going on your second turn. Now, coupled with something like Spiritomb, which is commonly played, and in the deck that Trevenant is played in commonly, you just wall behind Spiritomb until you've got everything set up, and then you bring forward Trevenant and start tree slamming. So basically, you can go the entire game without ever playing an item card. Obviously, if you kill Trevenant, the deck that it is played in, that did go undefeated, started to play Gothitelle, so that was also an option. But ignoring that, if you do kill Trevenant, then okay. You've got a couple turns where you can start playing your items, start going through your deck until they inevitably bring back Trevenant with one of the frequently played recovery cards in the format, Super Odd, Pokemon Retriever, until it's back active and tree slamming again. Okay, you can use Lysandra to get around it, but that's your support for the turn, and let's face it, if you've been item locked for a great deal of the game, especially if you didn't start with something like Spiritomb, you might not have had time to get your Claydol out, and your hand's pretty cloggy, considering you can't play your items, so something like Claydol isn't going to draw you a whole lot of cards, even when you're Cosmic Power in 2 item cards to the bottom of your deck, so you just draw like an energy or a supporter. And draw supporters are, well, they're played in the format, but they aren't played in the high numbers, mainly because you can, but you can't play 4 Juniper in the format, so you don't have the guaranteed, right, I'm going to draw into a support and it's probably going to be a Juniper, and then I just get to draw 7 cards into my deck. You might draw into something like a Pokemon Collector, and that's not that helpful when you're trying to deal with item lock. It outclasses pretty much all the other item lockers, Gothitelle, because it basically does the same thing, and it hits the bench, only it's a stage 1. Manectric with Disconnect and the Zebstrika with Disconnect. Okay, you're not doing as much damage. It's an attack, so it's not even. It's harder to. It's not even as hard to get rid of, since Lysandrian out of the way is also a viable option. It's just it's just better than all the other ones, and then normally that wouldn't be a problem, but it's what the item lock does to the opposing player that really causes the issue. But it is kind of annoying making at least 3 cards redundant off the top of my head. You know. Unlike Standard, getting a Pokemon for a counter attack are available if you are playing one, but just anything like one of your attackers in the deck is a lot harder when you have 1 copy in 100 card decks, rather than in Standard where you probably have 4 copies in a 60 card deck. The item lock completely shuts off any way to defend yourself, like energy removal, or cards like that would see niche play like Max Potion and Battle Compressor. So you're unable to get it out of the way with Gust of Wind, funnily enough. You're unable to remove its energy unless you play something like Team Flare Grunt, but then you can't draw any cards, and how are you going to draw into Team Flare Grunt? You can't heal yourself with Max Potion. You can't get cards into the discard pile for something like Battle Compressor, maybe a Flareon deck, maybe the Revival deck. You can't use Versus Seeker to get supporters out the discard pile, maybe if you were running Battle Compressor and Versus Seeker as a little engine. So it just shuts off counterplay. As I said, does 100 damage without a muscle band or anything on turn 2. And there's basically very little counterplay. Playing Dark isn't really a viable option because it's not had a lot of support that you can play in the format for a long while. I mean, what we've had. You can't play Mega Absol, so it is basically the baby of Yveltal that is carrying the deck at this point. There's the Honchkrow deck that has seen some play. The Shifries that punish power using, but it's not really a power, so it's not really helping out there. Basically, Dark isn't going to help you against the rest of your 3 or 4 matches, and it probably even won't help you win the match where you've got type advantage. Now that says something. As I said, Gothitelle, which is a stage 2 with no resistance and attack not really compatible with DCE, since it basically needs you to load it full of psychic energies to do any meaningful damage. It's also weak to itself, and obviously it being weak to psychic, which is arguably the best type in Unlimited in the format, well, it's a lot easier to counter considering more people are playing psychic than more people are playing dark. The 3 retreat and the X status don't really stop it from doing anything. I mean, okay, they're arguably a drawback, but it's not really doing anything. And basically, just the tournament results speak for themselves. Item lock is very strong in the format. I mean, when Mega Manetric was still around, like for basically the one tournament, the Zebstrika was played as an alternative win condition to just lock your opponent out of the game. And considering a deck that used 110 HP staged 100 like 210 sorry HP stage 2 with 110 damage attack that can for 2 energy. Well, you know what Mega Manetric does. But considering that deck used that card and yet still used like a 90 HP stage 1 that does 40 damage in item locks, it shows the power of item lock in the format. And the whole just playing more supporters doesn't really work unless you are playing something like Porygon 2 or Magnezone from Plasma Storm to, supplement using 2 supporters a turn. And even then, there's only so many draw supporters. At what point do we justify using something like Tierno to draw more cards? Because, that's basically your only option against item lock. You can't really. I mean, the more support. There's a lot of setup supporters people play in the format, like Pokemon Collector, Roseanne's Research, Lynette's Net Search, and you can't really tell people to just get rid of those for like draw supporters when they need those for basically to execute their core strategy of the deck, and obviously to just basically attempt to win against the other matches they'll face in the tournament. Since if you don't have those, you're in an inherent disadvantage versus decks that do play them, such as Trevenant. So basically, you just get shut off a great deal of your deck. The counters are either non-existent, not effective enough, or just put you have too much of a drawback. So I definitely think something needs to be done about Trevenant. I know the people who run the format are obviously very hesitant to perhaps like nerf the Trevenant, lower its damage or anything, because that's obviously hard to implement. So I definitely think this should be on the suspect list, and probably we should have a ban list vote for it. If not just to see everyone else's opinions, but I definitely feel that Trevenant has proved its power. Well, it's proved its power, and maybe I don't really like the term, but proved how broken it is in the format, or how format warping it can be when it does put up 4 tournaments in a I don't know if they were in a row, I can't remember, but 4 tournaments where I went completely undefeated against a wide variety of decks. So, let's talk about Gust of Wind. Now again, let's talk about the bad points. It's an item, and as we just talked about, there's not much you can do with it if they've got a Trevenant active. But I mean, it's supposedly counters Trevenant, even though you can't use it. That shows something. But anyway, so first of all, Pokemon Catcher, that got errated from basically being a Gust of Wind clone to needing a coin flip. Now, let's think back to when it wasn't errated, and that basically mean that you got an extra Gust of Wind, uh, as well as the basically 4 or 5 that you can use in a match. So that was basically 6 Gust effects that didn't take up your support for the turn. Basically, because Lysandra wasn't around that time, I don't think. And then there's stuff like Double Gust if you want to count that, but no, not a lot of people play that. But basically, they errated Pokemon Catcher for a reason. Attackers are getting really stronger and stronger, and Catcher not requiring a coin flip it was just too strong. Bench setters, I mean, the old thing of just Gust Claydol and win the game, that's not even a thing anymore. You can if you have dominant ball position, you can play Gust of Wind nearly every turn of the game, 5 turns in a row, and completely shut off your opponent from having energy on the board, an attacker to use, and just any chance to come back, unless they're playing Mill or something like that, but that's not going to happen. You don't even have to use energy removal or super energy removal. Your opponent would ideally have to use those to try and stop your sweep, but obviously if they're using Trevenant and then using Gust of Wind, not much you can do about that. Anyway, Gust of Wind can completely throw the game for you. It completely it's just so good. It completely just wipes your opponent out. And it is, bear in mind, alright, throwing the number about 5 or 6 like Gust of Winds in a game, that doesn't sound achievable, but it actually is. You play Gust of Wind once, and then you just need a Junk Arm, a Dowsing Machine, an Item Finder, Miley's Request to bring them back. And those cards are all played in pretty much every deck in the format. And it's kind of annoying because the cards like Dowsing Machine, they're good cards. People didn't like Junk Arm in the format because from what it basically gave you in basically 8 catches in the game in the standard format at the time. And obviously, the good cards to execute a lot of different strategies in the format, but they're also enablers to basically give you 5 Gust effects that don't take up your support for a turn and have very little downside. I mean, come on. Something needs to be done about that. I don't really want to see the banning of stuff like Junk Arm, Dowsing Machine, and Item Finder. I don't think it will happen. Maybe like 1 should be banned or something just to lower it down, but maybe Gust needs to be out, and then we would have I don't know, Pokemon Catcher and Lysandra as the catcher effects and Double Gust, or maybe what has been talked about for Lysandra's Trump card, which isn't getting banned in this format, if you didn't hear about that, where if it gets played it goes to the Lost Zone, so you can't recover it. Maybe that should be happening, I don't know. But you can potentially do it 4 or 5 turns in a row and completely just, you take 1 knockout and then the game is eventually over from that point onwards, because your opponent will never come back. You would just literally spam Gust of Wind, use Lysandra, because you probably don't need to draw cards if you're in the lead and taking prizes every turn, and your opponent will never get more than 1 energy attachment on a Pokemon because it would just be dead outright. You even just need Gust of Wind 4 times to win a game, knocking out 4 EXs. It's really not that hard to use it. Like, every deck in the format can use this strategy, which you could argue means it's balanced, but some decks can use it better than others, and the ability to completely shut your opponent out of the game isn't really fair. It just completely stop them from using counter attacks, and it's just basically whoever gets the first Gust of Wind can win the game with basically no counterplay other than playing item lock, but then you just use Lysandra. the argument that item lock restricts Gust of Wind, okay, it does for your opponent, but the people playing item lock still get to use it, because unless you're playing Vileplume, which not many people are, I mean, there's basically no counterplay to it. So I would definitely like to see something done with Gust of Wind. I know that catcher effects are sometimes a necessity, and I'm not saying that we should have none in the format, because obviously I'm not arguing for the ban of Lysandra. I'm not even arguing for the ban of, well, for something to be done about Versus Seeker for Lysandra or Milo's request for Lysandra, which is you can play 3 Lysandras a game. That's just off the top of my head. There's probably other ways to do it, especially if you include the Junkan for Versus Seeker for Lysandra and all those plays. But that's taking up your support for a turn, which ideally isn't even that much of a drawback in the format where bench sitters and draw Pokemon are so ubiquitous. Because pretty much every deck is running Claydol or another Pokemon that can draw cards. I mean, something to go. And the drawback for Dowser Machine and Item Finder, they're not even drawbacks for some decks. For pretty much any deck. I mean, yeah. The discard 2 cards is just sometimes isn't even a drawback. Anyway, so I would definitely like to see something done, if not just a discussion about it and how everyone feels about it. Because if everyone feels like it's fair, great. Okay, then we know where we are. And this goes for Trevenant as well. But if everyone obviously feels, I don't really like losing to Gust of Wind about 5 times every 5, getting Gust of Wind 5 turns in a row, or I don't really like being item locked for the entire game and like just wait until I top deck Lysandra to do something, but by the time I do, you know, it's pretty much game over. Then, you know, we should definitely do something about that. And I'm not saying that every card that has a Gust effect or every card that item lock should be banned. I'm not even saying that Trevenant or Gust of Wind should be banned. I'm just saying we should definitely try and see what everyone thinks about these cards, and you know, maybe put it to a vote like we have done in the past. Obviously Jolteon was an issue, but obviously that didn't get banned, and that's kind of rectified itself. But the results speak for themselves. 4 tournaments where it goes undefeated. That's good. Like straight out, that's a very good deck in general. But considering Trevenant is basically the main win condition of the deck, and the deck revolves around keeping Trevenant alive with cards like Flash Fire Dustoir. And obviously when Dark Palm was in there, that was a whole different story, which made it even more oppressive. But the results definitely speak for themselves, and I definitely feel something needs to be a discussion about it, if anything else. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, and hopefully this has provided some food for thought for you all, and I'll see you in the next video.